Hey, welcome to our explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest, toughest questions we all face. Why do we suffer? We're going to break down a sermon that gives us a really surprising take on it, that God's answer isn't some neat, tidy explanation, but something way more personal.
You know, this sermon kicks off with this idea, and it really taps into that feeling we all have, right? That desire for some kind of map, a bit of a guide for the road ahead, especially when we know it might get bumpy. We're all just looking for a little certainty in a world that feels anything but.
Okay, so here's how we're going to walk through this. First, we'll talk about that feeling of uncertainty. Then we'll get into what the sermon calls the two great burdens we all carry. From there, we'll unpack the main idea, a God who gets it because he's been through it. We'll see how that creates a bridge to him, and finally, how all of that becomes a real foundation for us to hang on.
You know how it is at the start of a new year. There's all this hope, but there's also a little bit of anxiety. We set goals, we look forward, but that question is always there in the back of our minds. What's actually going to happen? The sermon just dives right into this shared feeling, this search we're all on for a trustworthy guide.
And really, it all boils down to this, doesn't it? In a world that's just buzzing with opinions, you've got experts, influencers, your own inner doubts. Who do you actually trust? Who's got the right directions for how to do this thing called life? It's a huge question, and it sets the stage for everything else.
Okay, so now we're getting to the heart of the matter. The sermon makes this case that underneath all our day-to-day problems, the human experience is really defined by two huge universal burdens. And the first one, yeah, it's exactly what you think it is, suffering. And here's a really powerful point. Suffering is complicated. It's not simple. It can come from other people hurting us, it can be the fallout from our own bad decisions, or it can come from the world around us. And then there's what the sermon calls the Job problem, that random, senseless hardship that just makes no sense at all. So this is absolutely crucial. When someone is hurting, trying to give them a simple black and white reason why can actually do more harm than good. Saying something like, well, everything happens for a reason, or you must have done something to deserve this, doesn't just miss the point. It piles guilt and shame right on top of the pain that's already there. It just makes everything worse. And then there's the second great burden, the fear of death. The sermon points to a line from the book of Hebrews that calls this a lifelong slavery. It's like this constant shadow that's always kind of there in the background, the ultimate unknown that fuels so many of our other fears. So, if trying to come up with philosophical answers for our deepest pains doesn't really work, and sometimes even backfires, then what's left? What's God's actual response to these two massive burdens? This question right here is the major turning point for the whole sermon. And the answer that's offered, it's incredibly powerful. The sermon argues that God's response isn't a theory. It isn't a lecture. His answer to our pain was to literally step into our pain. It's all about a shared experience, not a detached explanation. This is it. This is the core message in a nutshell. Instead of sending down a memo from on high explaining suffering, God sent himself. The answer to the problem of humanity was for God to become fully, completely human. The sermon builds this idea in 3 steps, straight from Scripture. So first, there's identification. As it says in Hebrews, he shared in their humanity. He became flesh and blood, just like you and me. This wasn't some kind of simulation, it was total immersion.
But why? Why do it? Well, the text is crystal clear on the reason. It was so he could genuinely experience our world. Not just watch it, but feel the full weight of it, the suffering, the struggles, the temptations. To know exactly what it's like to be us, from the inside out.
And here is the ultimate goal, the reason behind it all. He didn't just come to experience suffering, he came to take it on, to confront its final form, death. The whole point was to get into the ring, to face the very thing that holds us captive in fear, and to defeat it from within. Okay, so that's a huge, singular event in history. But how does that actually help us today in our lives? Let's take a look at how the sermon builds that bridge from the past to the present.
Now, the sermon uses this term, high priest, to describe what Jesus is doing right now. And look, that might sound a little ancient, a little formal, but think of it this way. A priest was a bridge between people and God. So in this context, it means Jesus is our permanent, always-on advocate. He's the bridge who not only is divine, but who gets our human weakness because he's actually lived it.
And this comparison just lays out the shift so clearly. You had the old system, where priests offered temporary sacrifices, where access to God was kind of conditional and based on rituals. But now, in this new reality, you have a permanent high priest. Access is constant, and it's not based on rituals, but on a shared human experience. It's a total game changer.
I have to say this is probably my favorite analogy from the whole sermon. Long before 7-Eleven was a thing, Jesus was the original 24/7 source of help. No holidays, no closing time. Because he's been through it all, that line of communication is always open and help is always available.
So where does this all lead? It leads to something incredibly practical. If God's answer is a person who felt our pain and is now our constant advocate, how does that help us endure what we're facing right now? How do we actually hold fast when life gets hard?
You hear this phrase again and again in the sermon, hold fast. But it makes a really important distinction. This isn't about just gritting your teeth and trying to be stronger. It's about consciously leaning on a foundation that's already been built for you. Endurance, in this view, comes from reliance, not just your own resilience.
And it really boils down to two practical pillars. First, you acknowledge the facts of what happened. Christ lived through suffering, and he defeated death. And second, you access the help that's available right now by relying on his role as that constant 24/7 advocate. It's a 1-2 punch of past events and present reality.
All right, so let's just pull it all together one last time. God's answer to our suffering isn't a complex philosophical argument. It's his presence. The biggest fear we have, death, is dealt with by the one person who actually beat it. And because he's experienced our struggles, help is always, always available. So our job? It's to endure by holding on tight to that reality.
And that really leaves us with this final thought to chew on. This sermon offers a powerful perspective that strength is found not in an explanation, but in a person. So it kind of begs the question for all of us. When you're in the thick of it, when all the easy answers fail, where do you find your foundation? What gives you the strength to endure?